Okay, we should be set.
Okay, great. Well, we'll call to order the meeting of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board of the City of Moab on April 14th, 2021 at 2:04 p.m. We'll begin today, as every day, with the written determination to conduct electronic meetings. Let me just get out my microscope here. Written determination of the chair of the public body pursuant to House Bill 5002 and Utah Code Annotated 52-4-2074A and B. Whereas pursuant to Moab Municipal Code 2.08.015A, I am the presiding officer chair at all meetings of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board. Whereas Utah Code Annotated 52.4.101, the Open and Public Meetings Act governs the conduct of meetings of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board. Whereas the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act amendments provide that a public body may convene and conduct an electronic meeting without an anchor location if the chair of the public body, A, makes a written determination that conducting the meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. B, states in the written determination described in subsection 4A the facts upon which the determination is based. Whereas in the previous written determinations that I made from August through December 2020 and January through March 2021, I stated the facts regarding COVID-19 and transmission, and I incorporate those prior written determinations here. Whereas the state of Utah remains under a state of public health emergency, Grand County is in a moderate level of transmission, and the City of Moab board meetings do require attendance by individuals at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19. And as of February 19, 2021, the CDC still indicates that the lowest risk for meetings is virtual only. Whereas the health and safety of board members, city officials, and employees, staff, and members of the public is best served by holding electronic meetings of the board. Whereas the board has prepped for and demonstrated the ability to effectively conduct its public meetings electronically, including providing members of the public means to observe the board's meetings and provide comments electronically. Now, therefore, I conclude that conducting Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board meetings with an anchor location that is physically accessible for members of the public to attend in person presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination will expire 30 days after the day upon which I made the determination. It is possible that circumstances could warrant future determinations, and so I may reissue future written determinations at that time. Jeremy Lynch, Board Chair, April 14th, 2021. Okay. Did everyone get that? Great. Well, we'll move on to item 3, Annual Open and Public Meetings Act training. And Carly, do you have something on this?
Yeah, so what we have our city attorney, Lori Simonson, is present with us. Thank you for being here, Lori. So I let her do the introduction, but it's required that we do Open Meetings Act trainings for all our boards. And she's been kind enough to set some time to do that for us. So I'll let her take it away.
Great, Carly. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me to your meeting. As Carly mentioned, board officials are required to have annual Open and Public Meetings Act training. And so I've prepared a short training. It doesn't cover everything, but it covers many of the main points that I think come up frequently regarding the Open and Public Meetings Act. And so just by a show of hands, how many folks remember being through Open and Public Meetings Act training previously? Okay, almost everybody's hand is going up. Well, you're going to remember this one because this is a chance for me to show you pictures of my dogs. And so this is going to be the most interesting Open and Public Meetings Act training that you've been through. So let me go ahead. So can I share my screen in this one, Summer? Let me go ahead and try.
All right, Summer's doing 2 meetings at once, but you should be able to.
All right. So I tried this a little earlier, and if I do the slideshow version of this, it kind of screws up the PowerPoint, but can everyone see the title page, Open and Public Meetings Act Training? All right, excellent.
Yes.
Thumbs up from the chair. All right. So the first question everyone has is, come on, why are we here? And why are we here? It's because you are required to have annual training on the Open and Public Meetings Act, also called OPMA, and that's under state statute. So that's why we're here, because this is your annual required training. What is the Open and Public Meetings Act? Well, many of you that have been through this training before know what it is. It's the state's sunshine law, and they're called sunshine laws for a reason. Used to be a lot of public business was conducted behind closed doors. The public didn't know what was happening. Meetings would happen, votes would be taken, all in favor, aye, and we move on. And the public has no idea how the board or body came to that decision. None of the deliberation happened in the public. And so many states passed sunshine laws, which require the public's business to happen in the public. It sets the minimum requirements for transparency, not maximum. So you can be more open and transparent, but you can't be less open and transparent. So what is the public policy? Why do we have this law? And I'm going to just say, I'm going to sum this up by saying, the reason we have this law is because you are conducting the public's business, and the public wants to be able to see you conduct their business in an open and public meeting. So the main points here are points A and B, that a public body needs to take their actions openly and conduct their deliberations openly. So B is what really, I think, we've said it's the public gets to watch the sausage getting made. It isn't always pretty. It isn't always efficient. Sometimes there's lots of deliberation and discussion, and maybe conversations trail off into areas and we get into the weeds on some things, but that is part of the public process. The public process for government, as you all know, is neither always efficient nor clean. It is that we have deliberations in public, and they may be differences of opinion, but what happens when the public gets to see you making your decisions? There's better buy-in. The public knows that you struggled with hard issues. They know that you wrestled with decisions, and they get to see that. So that's the public policy behind this. All right, so open meetings. The rule on this, just to remember, is that all meetings are open unless you're permitted to close them. So what are some examples of reasons you can close a public meeting? You can discuss pending litigation, the professional character or competence or physical and mental health of an individual. This is important to remember, is that if you have a meeting that you want to close, you need to notice the reason that you're going to close the meeting, the purpose, and then you need to stick to that purpose. So you can't close a meeting to discuss pending litigation, pending remote or a reasonably probable litigation, and then discuss whatever you would like. You need to stick to that topic. On a closed meeting, if you close the meeting and you discuss topics that are not covered by the reason you closed the meeting, a judge or an adjudicative body later can decide that you weren't allowed to close that part of the meeting, that wasn't part of the reason you closed it, and that information becomes public. So what's a meeting? So we all know that this is a meeting. This was an agendized, publicly noticed meeting, but other things can be meetings that we may be unaware of. So when you have a meeting is when you have a gathering of a quorum where you have jurisdiction to act over a matter as a public body. So that can be a workshop, that can be a strategy session. All of those are considered a meeting under the Open and Public Meetings Act. What is not a meeting? So knowing what a meeting is also knowing what a meeting is not. A chance or social gathering. So if you are at a holiday party of a neighbor and other board members are there, that's a chance or social gathering. What I would encourage you to do is not discuss upcoming votes and how you're going to vote on something, because you can turn a social gathering into a meeting unintentionally. But if you gather at someone's house and there happen to be several other members of the water board at that meeting, you can stay at that social event, you can stay at that social event. I encourage you not to deliberate or discuss upcoming votes because that may turn into a meeting. Also, if you have a meeting which you have no ability to take formal action on or no formal action is contemplated, you can see there in paragraph A, that is also potentially not a meeting. What is convening? So conveniently, some of these definitions are defined. Sometimes the definitions are just as vague as the term itself. But again, this is a convening of the group or a public body where you have authorization to act. So let's say there was a meeting convened to, I don't know, to discuss a school board issue. You don't have jurisdiction over that. So you don't have jurisdiction or advisory power over everything as the water board. You have jurisdiction over a limited subject matter. So when you convene on that subject matter, you are convening for purposes of a meeting. So quorum. For purposes of your body, Summer was kind enough to send me your bylaws. Your bylaws state that 3 members is a quorum. So that's where you get into, if you are gathered as a quorum, more than 3 members or more, and you're discussing or deliberating matters, you potentially have convened a meeting. In these times, electronic meetings, we've had a lot of experience with learning how to navigate electronic meetings. And this section I just updated this morning because the Open and Public Meetings Act was changed and the statute was updated right around the time of COVID because electronic meetings needed to happen where you did not have an anchor location. So previously, you could have an electronic meeting, but there needed to be an anchor location. The new section here is the 50, so in chapter 52, where the legislature decided that we could hold meetings of all of our public bodies without having an anchor location. So in this case, we're all coming in by Zoom. That is why your chair read the written determination. You can meet completely electronically without a anchor location. So normally anchor location was City Hall. Someone would be at City Hall. You could come to City Hall. Maybe a couple members would come in electronically. Now we don't have that anchor location of City Hall. So your chair reads a written determination saying that having meetings with a anchor location presents a health and safety issue, and that it is the determination of the chair that a meeting could be held electronically. And that written determination needs to be, if you want to continue to meet electronically, needs to be renewed every 30 days. That is why your chair rereads that determination every 30 days. I do update that with current moderate level, high level, low level if we get there. And with updated information from the CDC, I do that for the City Council, and then I share those with Carly and Summer so she can share them with your chair. So let's talk a little bit about electronic communications. Electronic communications can be considered a meeting. So if you text a quorum of the water board with a deliberative item, you potentially have conducted debate or deliberation in a meeting. So we need to think in terms of a meeting just isn't all physically present in a room, it is a quorum. So if you have an email that you hit reply to all members of the water board, and you say, this is how I'm going to vote on this issue. This is my opinion on it, and I encourage you all to vote like I'm voting. That can be considered a meeting because you've communicated with a quorum of the public body. And so electronic communication is one thing to be careful about, because when we think of meetings, we think of everybody sitting either in the same room on the same Zoom, but electronic communication can be considered a meeting. So this is what I just said. So here's what on the left-hand side, I say, I want to do this. I want to hit a reply to all, and I want to give everybody my 2 cents, and I want to encourage them to vote the same way I'm going to vote before a meeting. So what do y'all think? Do you think that's a good idea? Now I'm seeing a little head shaking. So this is where you get to see my dogs. So this is my dog, Miss Maple. And this is the face she makes when she doesn't want something to happen. Or so she says, Mo, you can't do that. That's not a good idea. I encourage, my rule of thumb with everybody is please just don't hit reply to all. That's the easiest thing. That's the attorney in me. That's the easiest thing. I understand there's sometimes you like to communicate with your fellow members. I just don't want you to have any communication that looks like deliberation or debate, because then it looks like, again, we get back to this purpose, and the legislative purpose of this is the sunshine law. Those deliberations or debate, that should happen in the public meeting. So it's easier for me to just tell you, please don't hit reply to all. Here's my next question. Okay, but I really want to. I just want to text everybody. I'm not going to email, I'm just going to text. Can I just text my fellow members to get them on the same page before the meeting? But I really want to do this. Okay, you all know what's coming. Look, what does Miss Maple say? This is Miss Maple. She says, Mo, that's not a good idea. You can't, here's my test on this. Sometimes people call me and ask a question. Can I do this? Can I do that? I'm going to say this is guidance to you to use your judgment. It feels like you're not conducting the public business in the public eye. Just think of Miss Maple's face here. The public wants to see you struggling with issues and debating them and doing that, the hard work. So if it feels like you're deliberating in a text message or email, think about Miss Maple here. She says, not such a good idea. Okay, let's try another one. Oh, but how about this? I just want to send a scientific study to my fellow members, which I think is helpful. I read this thing, or I read an article in the New York Times. It's relevant to the stuff we do on the water board. I just want to send that. I just want to email everybody on the board and say, hey, check out this article. What do you think? So I have two dogs. Eve's nodding her head here. So I have two dogs. This is Chops. And he says, sure, you could totally do that. That's fine. Okay. You can send out information. You can say, here's something. I always encourage you to put the bottom, please don't hit reply to all, because you can send information out. That's not deliberation or debate. So that's the difference on that. If you send out an article and then someone else responds, okay, that's great, and here's how I'm going to vote on an issue, and I encourage everybody to do the same, we fall back into, no, that's not a good idea. But purely sending information out, or, hey, I'm not going to be able to make the meeting, I'm going to be late, or things like that, those are fine to communicate. Okay. I know what Lori's saying, but Lori's just making our job harder. Wouldn't it just be more efficient if we just figured everything out in advance and showed up at the meeting and voted on it? Wouldn't that be faster? Well, yes, of course. But that's not how government should work. And that's not the intent of the law. So David Church he's retired now, but he's a longstanding attorney with the Utah League of Cities and Towns. He's an institution as far as Open and Public Meetings Act training. He says, you know, essentially the point of the law is that you want to conduct when you conduct the public's business, it should be in the public. When in doubt, the meeting should be open, and that your deliberations should be in the open. And I think his point was, look, if you're not comfortable with that, one of his comments was, if you're not comfortable with that, then you shouldn't be in public service, because that's the point of our system, is that the public expects to see their business and understand what went into things, and not expect that, boy, this was a done deal. It seems like this smells fishy to me. It seems like the fix was in on this before everyone came to the meeting. So it's less efficient, but that's what we want. That's what we want to make government. We want to make government open. So what's the required notice of a meeting? Pretty simple. Public meetings require 24-hour notice. Public hearings, 7 days. And then for city council, we publish the anticipated meeting schedule annually, and I'm sure you do as well. So what's the difference between a public meeting and a public hearing? Well, some things are required to have a public hearing. Some land use changes are required to have a public hearing. Some financial actions by the city are required to have a public hearing. And it's just a means for, as you can see here, at which members of the public are provided a reasonable opportunity to comment on the subject of the hearing. So you can have a public meeting without a public hearing. Normally, we have a section in City Council where there's citizens to be heard, but then sometimes we'll have a public hearing on a particular item. So for example, it looks like to me your agenda today is a public meeting, but there is no public hearing. So what are the minimum requirements if you notice a public meeting? It's not a ton. You need to include the agenda, the date, time, and place. You have to give the public enough information to know where to show up and how to participate. I always get questions on the agenda. What needs to be on the agenda? So the general rule of thumb on the agenda, my rule of thumb, is that are you providing enough information for someone of the public to look at the agenda item and think, do I want to pay attention to that? Do I want to show up and read that or not? Or participate in that? Do I want to watch that part of the agenda? You just need to give the public enough information to know, do I care about that agenda item? And do I want to, these days, log into the meeting to watch that? So for example, you can't put on the agenda miscellaneous. It has to be, it doesn't have to be fine tooth comb. We're going to consider, a land use change for, basically this many exact acres. You don't have to put the exact acres, but you should put the address so people know what we're talking about. Those kind of details, enough details so the public understands what you're going to be talking about. So if something's not on the agenda, the public body can't take any final action on that item. So there's a temptation to talk about things that maybe aren't on the agenda. Just fine. Sometimes there is a comment or a citizen question that comes up and maybe a little bit of deliberation or talk amongst the public body, but you can't act on it. If it's not on the agenda, you can't act on it. What you can do is schedule it for a future event agenda and let the public know or other members of the body know that you will take that agenda, that item up on the next agenda, but you can't act on that if it's not on the agenda. All right, so what happens enforcement wise? Let's say we don't follow the Open and Public Meetings Act. So it's a criminal violation if we knowingly or unintentionally violate the Open and Public Meetings Act, Class B misdemeanor. That's a pretty high burden, intentionally and knowingly. But my job is to basically make sure I say that we never, ever, ever want a headline on the newspaper to say, public body fill in the blank in Moab violates Open Meetings Act. So if you come to me with a question, it seems like I'm making things more difficult or more complicated. It's only because I want to protect you and your public body from ever having any criticism that we didn't do things openly and transparently. All right, so here's my slide when things go wrong, because sometimes they have for cities. Here we have one from the Board of County Commissioners. They failed to include on the meeting an agenda and ordinance passed by County Commission. Oops, we now know if it's not on the agenda, you can't pass it. You can't take final action on it. This one, after you've sat through this much of the training, should have been a no-brainer. If I'd asked you, can we put something, can we pass an ordinance that wasn't on the agenda? I would hope I would have gotten a lot of nods that would have violated the Open and Public Meetings Act. So here's what I want a few takeaways as we get towards the end here. I think main thing is just ask yourself, what would Ms. Maple do? And that is my just way of saying you need to use your judgment. Now you know the principles and the guiding concepts behind the Open and Public Meetings Act. And so when you come up on a situation where you think, what should I do? The goal behind this act is sunshine and making sure that the deliberations and discussions happen in the public. So now this is my disclaimer, because I'm your city attorney. This training is an overview, and it's many of the important aspects of the State Open and Public Meetings Act, but not all of them. I've hit some of the key ones, the questions that come to me more often than not. There's a lot of aspects of the Open and Public Meetings Act we don't have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, but I get a lot of questions about electronic messages Can I do this? Can we talk about things that aren't on the agenda? So I tried to capture in this training some of the big ticket items and questions that come to me quite a bit, but it's not intended to cover every aspect of the act. So that's why you have me. And so here's my thing. Unless you, if you don't remember anything else, you're going to remember this slide. This is your 24-hour help desk. That's me. That's my phone number. That's my email. And then you can see I have some restrictions. I used to have that in really small print, but some restrictions apply. Calls from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. subject to additional fees. My joke is, though, please call me. That's what I'm here for. If you have questions, I want to help you. I want to answer questions. You know, if everything was just as easy as looking up the rule in the rule book, I wouldn't work full time. You could just look things up. But we have situations that come up all the time that don't fit neatly into the rules and regulations. That's why I'm here to help you. All right, so, and because if you haven't gotten enough of Miss Maple, there's the end. That's Miss Maple saying we're done. And at this point, I am going to stop sharing my screen. And I can take any questions that you have. Yes.
Hey, Laurie, in connection with council, did the training you just gave us qualify as our Open Meetings Act training in that organization as well? In other words, am I done for the year, or do I have to go to more OPMA training?
Well, so Mike, I'm going to say this training would count, but I expect that I'll be doing a training for the council in one of your council meetings. So you will be in a council meeting when it happens again. So
okay.
This would be sufficient, but I'll do it for the council again anyway. But you know what I'll probably do for the council? I'm going to update my pictures, and we'll do something different, because you've seen this one before, Mike. So thanks for sitting through it again.
Oh man, I will really miss Miss Maples. You know that?
She does that face more often than you'd want. So that's yeah.
Thank you, Laurie.
Thanks, Mike.
Eve?
Thanks, Laurie. That was, you could syndicate this one. I think that that's the best one I've ever seen. I don't really have a question, but rather a comment that I'm kind of surprised that our bylaws say that a quorum is 3 people, and but I guess I've been absent. I don't know if it was changed or if it's always been that way, but it seems like we've always had 4 people for meetings, and we have 7 members, so it's not even half. And I know that it's quite a process to change our bylaws, but unless other people can educate me on why 3 is a quorum, I think it's something we should maybe talk about in the coming year. Just saying.
Yeah, I would say, and I put Summer on the spot because I did ask her to send me your bylaws, you know, a few minutes before this meeting, because I wanted to make sure. I believe that I have the correct version. So it is, let me just tell you, I have the July, oh, I'm sorry, this is actually, hold on a second. I think they were 2018. Hold on a second. Yeah, I have actually, no, July 12, 2017. And then it looks like they were updated in maybe 2018. So if you have newer ones, please let me know. The only reason sometimes I've seen public bodies have a lower number for a quorum potentially than just over half of the members is that sometimes they might have had a difficulty in the past getting a quorum. So sometimes you have a lower number of a quorum because travel time or other reasons. And if you've had difficulty getting a quorum, I've seen bodies reduce the number necessary for a quorum. So I don't know if that's what happened here.
Thanks.
Arnie, did you have a question?
I had the same question Eve had. I thought our quorum was 4 also. And maybe I'm misinformed. And I also like to thank Laurie for that presentation too. It was about as succinct as I've heard it before. I've heard it at least a dozen times now too, because of a couple different reasons. But that was about as succinct and educational as I've ever heard it before. But I got to admit, you're not quite as funny as that guy Church when he gave it. But then he took a half an hour. He took a half an hour, 45 minutes to do it. But he was very funny, and he was very good. The Leagues of Cities and Towns did appreciate him over the years. And then my last question was, we used to have a spot for citizens to be heard on our agenda. Did that go away because of Zoom meetings, or was there a discussion on that I missed where we decided to take that off our agenda?
That happened at the beginning of COVID, is my understanding. I think Cara and I had that discussion, and we can put them on anytime again. We just haven't, that's all.
It's kind of tough on a Zoom meeting for citizens to be heard, but we do have a disclaimer that if they really want to be heard, they can come in. Is that still true? If somebody really wanted to talk to the board, is it possible for them at this point in time, even if they're not on the quote agenda, as a citizens to be heard?
Like right now, if we wanted to invite citizens to be heard, is that what you're
Yeah, if somebody was really interested outside of our group here, a citizen wanted to speak, actually, is that something that could happen?
Yeah, we could put that on the next agenda. The next Zoom meeting will provide like a way for them to participate.
I think it has to be on the agenda, Arnie. I don't think we can do it without it being on the
That's what
agenda.
I'm wondering. And so I'm wondering if, as a group, whether we want to include that. We have had citizens come in that want to be heard before. And I realize that we are meeting by Zoom now, and it's not quite as simple as it was before.
It might be a moot point if we take up the discussion Mike had suggested about meeting in person next time. But we still should put it on the agenda.
Then we still should put it on the agenda. So I guess it's my opinion that it should be on the agenda in case somebody does want to be heard. I don't know how the rest of the group feels about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that, Arnie. And although I thought, maybe I'm wrong, that it was kind of at the chair's discretion about whether they wanted to accept comments at public meetings as opposed to public hearings anytime you want, whether it was listed explicitly as a citizen to be heard or not. So that would help.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. I think it's a way to let the public know that they can come speak. But if someone found this meeting and wanted to say something, it would be at the discretion of the chair to say, we don't, because again, things that are acted upon need to be on the agenda. You can't act on citizens to be heard anyway, because it's not anything that's agendized. I mean, it's not citizens to be heard, we're going to adopt this, park ordinance or whatever. It's just citizens to be heard. So if you didn't, there's nothing you're going to act on. So if someone found this meeting and said, can I please be heard? And the chair looked at me and said, that's not on the agenda. Can I let this person be heard? My answer is going to be yes, because you're not going to act today on anything they're going to say. You're just taking that information in and listening to it. And maybe if you want to act on it at a future meeting, you would put that on the next agenda. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Any other comments or questions for Lori?
Well, thank you. So
According
to Arnie, I'm going to work on my jokes, up my jokes for next year. I did watch David Church's trainings, and I realized that I could never be David Church. So David Church is an institution, and his shoes are just too big to fill. So I decided that instead of trying to replicate him, I'd just show you pictures of my pets.
Hey, Laurie, I want to tell you something. In the year or so I've been watching your work, you're gaining a lot of confidence, which is a great thing. And I remember talking to David a year or two ago at the conclusion of one of the meetings, and where he basically revealed that after all his decades in public service, that he can't be cynical watching the whole process work, because we're supposed to be, transparent and truthful and honest and all that. And all too often, it doesn't really work quite that way. So I hope we can all of us, not just yourself, keep from getting too cynical about the process and retain some faith in it.
Absolutely.
I had one more question. I have one more question, if you don't mind, Lori. I facilitate a partnership called the Moab Area Watershed Partnerships, and we've done a pretty good job of not having more than one county council person there, or two county council or two city council members at those meetings, so there's not a quorum there. But some of the things that are discussed on this from at the Moab Area Watershed Partnerships are items of information that the Water Conservation Board needs to hear. And we've had a couple. I don't think we've ever had, I think we've had 3 before, but I always thought 4 was the quorum at our Moab Area Watershed Partnerships meetings. I guess it becomes a little difficult. We do deliberate in those things, but the partnership has no ability to take any actions on anything. So I'm not quite sure how that ferrets out. I just know that the county council people and the city council people are a little concerned if there's more than 2 or 3 of them at that meeting. Have you, what's your opinion on our watershed partnership meetings? And does it constitute a meeting of the Conservation Board if there's 3 or more members there?
Well, oh, go ahead, Carly.
I was going to say, you know, Arnie, I'm so glad you brought this up because initially when I first got here, I thought the quorum was 4 as well. And I'd been counting at Mott meetings and I'm like, no, there are only 3 here. It's not a problem.
All right.
Because you do talk about, well, let's look into that. We'll have that answer. Lori and I, maybe we'll kind of see your input, Arnie, about what you think is discussed and why and what the outcome is, but we might need some more information.
Right. So let's look at 2 things we need to look at. First, we need to make sure that the bylaws are correct. I have the current version of the bylaws. And if in fact your bylaws say its quorum is 3, but if those meetings are not anything you have jurisdiction over, then I'm not going to have a ton of heartburn over it. But probably let's think about whether or not you want to just send 3 people to that or not. So
we'll get an answer for you, Arnie. We might give you a call.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for bringing. That's a good issue. Thank you for raising it.
Well, thank you, Lori. I appreciate it. I think we all do.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Thanks, Lori.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Well, we'll move on to approval of the minutes. We've had a few comments on the minutes, a few changes made. Does anyone else have any comments or a motion to make regarding the minutes from March 10th?
None of the minutes, none of the changes were significant, were they, Jeremy? They're just typos and stuff like that?
Nothing major.
I sent a few little minor typos to Carrie, although I realize I need to send them to Summer in the future. But they were just minor.
Yeah, I saw some minor typos in it too, but I didn't necessarily say change them, so that's cool. I'll move to approve the minutes as they stand.
I'll second that.
Okay, Arnie moves to approve. Eve seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Board and staff reports, and just in case this item goes a little bit long, I am going to have to leave in just a couple minutes. So Arnie, if you didn't hear me before, I'd ask that you take over at that point, and my apologies for not being here for the remainder of the meeting. Does anyone have from board or staff have a report you'd like to share with the group? Arnie.
So I guess am I still unmuted? First of all, Jeremy, you caught me a little by surprise, but while I've been sitting here, I managed to print all the documents that I'll need to run this meeting because I don't have 2 screens. Uh-oh. That's now getting feedback now. Hey, on April 30th, I attended the Utah Department of Ag and Food zone meeting out in Green River, and the USU people were a heavy presence. March 30th, excuse me. Thank you, Cara. The USU people were a heavy presence there. I thought was important to bring to this meeting is that we are getting a new extension agent. Actually, we're getting 2 extension agents. And USU, in terms of their extension agents, is pushing their extension agents to do a fair amount of work in terms of landscaping and water management when we're doing this when you're doing landscaping. And the other, come on, Arnie, the people that work in the other counties, the extension agents that work in the other counties have a program right now where they are talking about how to water lawns and how to landscape. And they've got a full curriculum sort of associated with it for the other 3 counties that are next to us that are in our zone. And I'm hoping that with the new USU extension agent that the city and others can draw upon their new expertise and their programs to work on landscaping and water conservation issues. Okay, just saying, we got 2 now, and they've got a program.
Have they hired them
So-
already?
I do not know. I was hoping that Ryan would have told us. He was on the hiring board. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah,
Can you guys still hear me?
yes.
Okay, I just got to notice my connection was unstable. Hey, moving on. Tomorrow, I'm supposed to talk with the people from the Division of Water Resources about watershed councils. I'm not sure exactly what they want from me. I really don't think they want me on their watershed councils, but I think they want me to talk to them about what might be appropriate for the watershed council for our area. If you guys don't remember, not this year, but last year, there was a law that went into effect that created watershed councils, and they created one big one for the state and then for 7 other areas in the state. And we're part of the southeast area at this point in time. So they're moving forward with that. They're supposed to have it all put together by 2022. We'll see how that goes. I'll keep you updated. Okay. April 20th. This may not be necessary to everybody, but there's a virtual BDA workshop that I believe is for free, or it's $30. May 6th and 13th from 10 to 12, the Utah Water Conservation Forum is having 2 4-hour sessions. That's free. It's run by the State Division of Water Resources. It's supposedly the new science for this year. We're going to hear about it. May 7th, this may not apply to everybody either. There's a stream restoration webinar for 45 minutes put on by the Division of Water Rights. There's been some changes to the stream alteration laws that you might be interested in. And then finally, there's water conservation training on May 20th, 2021, being held by the Rural Water Association of Utah. I was certified in water conservation training 2 or 3 years ago. Of course, I didn't keep up my CEUs. I didn't think there was really much more to be learned, but I don't remember seeing anybody from the city, our city, Moab City, at that conservation training. And I don't know whether anybody's been to that conservation training from the city. I guess I'd suggest that the city consider either having at least one of the conservation board members, other than myself, because I've already taken the training, go, and perhaps somebody from the Public Works Department go to that conservation training also. It was fairly informative. It took a whole day. You can do it online. You don't have to travel to Salt Lake anymore. And that's my story today.
You're also the chair, Arnie. So you can ask for more. You're muted.
You're still muted, Arnie.
Now I'm not. I get it. I hadn't even got the rest of my documents yet. Now I am facilitating this meeting. So anybody else, finally, if you have any questions on any of the seminars, webinars that or anything that I just discussed, feel free to contact me and I can get you some more information on it. Does anybody else have any board or staff reports they'd like to give at this point in time?
Just me.
Carly, go ahead.
Would you like to talk about your open meetings, sorry, not open meetings, in-person meeting options? Like Mike mentioned, the city council is likely going to an in-person meeting option in May. The May meetings is what we have in mind, because the council will be vaccinated and the staff will be vaccinated at that time. And probably we're going to be looking at bringing planning commission on in person at some point, and of course this board. So just thought there should be a conversation. Mike might have input about what he would want the council would want to do. I don't want people to feel like they have to disclose their vaccination status or anything or plans, but what are people's thoughts?
Go ahead, folks.
Yes, for me.
Mike,
Can't
you're
hear
muted.
you, Mike.
Mike, you're muted.
Yes, for me.
Yeah, I'm vaccinated. I'm good, except when I can't push the stupid button. Yeah.
Sounded like the council is going to try to do some sort of hybrid thing. Is that still the case? It seems awkward.
Yeah, the mayor is not a fan of the hybrid meeting. Very difficult. I think we've had, and call-in option that we even had before COVID was really hard. So we're exploring that, but I don't know what your appetite is for it. We just don't have easy capability here in the council chambers. We'd have to maybe invest in some more hardware, software, and all that. So
I personally would rather see it all in person or all on Zoom. I find that I've been to several meetings over the last year that are a combination, and they're pretty horrible. It's pretty ineffective to really be able to do much of anything. Oh, thank you. Without having everyone on the same platform. And it's especially hard when I was chair to deal with that. Even, phone calls in, it's just really, really hard to deal with it. It's bad enough with all of us on Zoom. I'm okay with meeting in person. I personally am fully vaccinated as of now. What will be the policy in regards to masking or not? Because the other thing that I've been realizing at the conservation district meetings where we've been meeting in person in a garage, so there's plenty of airflow, is masked can be problematic to hear in person. So I was curious about that.
That's an excellent question. Oh, sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, Cara, you have a good point about hybrid meetings. GWISA, Grand County, they've been doing hybrid meetings and they really don't work. The only saving grace might be, Carly, you might be able to inquire with Summer or Carrie, because the council room has this nifty set of microphones that are all gained into a single amp and so forth. And if that system can pick up each council member's conversations and make them clearly audible, then that would make a hybrid meeting tolerable, I guess. But if you're just relying on somebody's microphone on their iPhone halfway across the room and trying to pick up somebody else, it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So I'd like to suggest that we, there's a mask mandate in place until June for Grand County. And I guess that what my suggestion would be that we wait until the June meeting to go in person, just because if the council goes first and then it's just really tough because everyone has to wear a mask or whatever, or they can't sit next to each other at the table. Maybe we should let the council dive in and
bugs.
Yeah.
Well, and
that's my suggestion.
And the other thing I was going to suggest too is that I think all of us are adults in this room or virtual room or whatever this Hollywood Squares is.
We're virtually adults.
Maybe sometimes. I really don't want to be an adult anyway. But I think the other piece to that is also, if you're sick, just don't come.
Well, one saving grace, if council members, for example, when they're speaking, could remove their mask temporarily, that would make the understanding problem a little bit easier. But I agree, it's kind of dicey no matter how you do it.
So that's what we've been doing in the other in-person meetings that I've been at, Mike, is that we all wear our masks unless we're actually talking. We also are staying outside of 6 feet of each other. And I don't really have a problem with somebody having to speak and taking their mask off. I'm ready to move away from Zoom. I think we have a much better relationships and a much better meeting when we're in person than we do over Zoom, especially when it gets larger than this group. This group's small enough to kind of make things happen, but when I get 40 people on a Zoom meeting with the mop, it's not manageable. And did anybody ask Jeremy his feelings on this before he left? Okay. So there's 2 suggestions out there, guys. One of them is to go ahead and start in May. The other suggestion is to wait until June. And if we start in May, there are some quirks to work out. We will have to wear masks. And like I said, I don't have a problem taking them off when we speak. We don't know how Jeremy feels about it, but everybody feels they'd like to go back to meetings at some point in time. Carly, go ahead, Car.
I would suggest maybe that, because I think the other wild card in all of this is public. And while I definitely want to have the capacity for citizens to be heard, I think as long as it's clear, if people show up that they will be masked and things like that, I think that that's really important as well, so that expectations are set up extremely clearly. I would be fine with being a guinea pig group in May with masks on to see how it goes. It can't, honestly, I don't think, based on my experience with the few meetings I've had, I don't think it'll be worse than Zoom.
So do we need a motion to move forward here in either one, or do we just need a consensus?
I think so. We didn't have this notice as an action item, which we
Right.
just learned is not good. So it's Jeremy's discretion, because he has to issue the written determination to meet remotely anyway. So what I'll suggest to him is that he watch this part of the meeting and make a determination about what he thinks is best, for whether it's May or June, or
Okay,
does that?
if I haven't stated my preference yet, I'd prefer, well, with like Cara, to let's be guinea pigs. Let's make this work. I got to make it work for several other places I have to go to, and sooner or later we're going to have to bust out of this mode. So, and if it doesn't work out very well the first time, it doesn't work out very well the first time.
The only other thing I'd like to just ask as a matter of information is, does the city with its ventilation system have any air purifying capacity? Because that might be something, especially when we get into winter months, so that might be worth looking at, is some air purifiers that can, because they're pretty quiet, I've been finding, and there's some that are they actually aren't that expensive, and they're quite effective.
I think I've seen them in the BLM office.
Yeah, and I've got one up at the nursery, and they're pretty amazing. So that just might be another thing to do that could be worth doing, that wouldn't be a massive expense, especially, like I said, when we hit the winter months when it's more flu season. And honestly, I might be wearing a mask in public settings for the flu from here on out.
Forever. Okay, if that's the case, Carly, is there anything else to discuss on this subject?
I don't think so. This is really helpful, and we'll prepare a plan.
Okay, so we're still on staff and board reports. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to report? Okay, if I don't hear anything, I guess we'll move forward to the introduction of who would that be? Who's the person in this Hollywood Squares that hasn't been here before? I think I know who it is. Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? By the way, it's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again too. Sure. Yeah, I'm delighted to join you all. I've met a few of you before, but I'm Mila Dunbar-Irwin. I'm coming over from the county actually, and I'm Moab's new sustainability director. So I know Carly's been doing it for a little while, in addition to everything else. So I'm very excited to be able to take that on and take us forward from here.
Yeah, yes. So I just want you guys to know that I've already pinged Mila, which I'm so pleased that she's on board right now, to take a look when she has a chance to at additional water consumption from hotels that are in the pipeline that were not included in the last survey that Rosemarie did. There's quite a few of them, and oncoming subdivisions as well. For example, the various phases of Lionsback, to in particular up against our total withdrawals from the Deep Glen Canyon aquifer. The city's about 2,200 acre feet, and so everybody's dying to know, gee, we're going to take another 500 or 1,000 or whatever the number is going to be. But Mila, if you could run that down by getting occupancy rates and number of rooms and all that good stuff, that'd be a big step forward, because a lot of people have asked about that. I would appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll add it to my list.
It's probably a small list.
Oh yeah, tiny, really. Yeah.
Tiny, yeah. You're just getting started.
Nothing to do here. Don't worry.
Oh, anything else you want to tell us about yourself?
I don't know.
What are you working on right now? What's on your list for water conservation? Can I ask you that?
Sure. I was chatting with Carly the other day, and we are going to talk about the potential landscape ordinance a little later in this meeting. So that is the upcoming thing for water conservation. And then otherwise I started on Monday, so I'm, still pretty much wrapping my head around exactly what we want to have on the priority list. I know the council has some, backlog of things that they'd like to see have happened yesterday. So we're gonna, start digging into see what's first in line. But the sustainability action plan is definitely a high priority. And then, we have a few public events coming up, Arbor Day being one of them. Other than that, I'm just gonna be getting myself acquainted with city water use in general. I think we're gonna have a meeting with Levi at some point here soon and kind of get a handle on the infrastructure and the systems and go forward from there.
Were you around for the state of science discussion, and did you attend that
I don't think
last month for the MOP meeting?
No, I wasn't at the last mob meeting.
I have a link to the group. If it wasn't me talking, this is the scientists and Mark and those guys talking. And the last 2 hours we spent, or was supposed to be just an hour and a half, but it ended up being 2 hours. I'll send you a link to that if you wanted to hear the state of science in terms of how much water we actually have. Okay?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. And I was at the meetings where Mark was presenting the results from their studies. So I heard some of his presentations on the numbers.
And he will be presenting again in May. They'll have some big news for us in May sometime. Mike, do you remember when that meeting is? I don't remember the date on that. It's not on my calendar yet.
Let me pull out my handy dandy little phone here. Let's see, May.
He hasn't sent an invitation to it yet.
Whoa, are you there? DWR Stilson, that would be May 11th. I have it marked on my calendar for what that's worth. I don't know if it was worth anything. But...
Yeah, I think that's correct. So that's another question at this point in time.
I have that too.
You have that too? This kind of meeting with DWRI is really talking to us, giving us all the information. If we're just there sitting in attendance and not discussing, are we violating the Open Meeting Act, Carly? That's another question for them at that point in time. There are some meetings that most of us need to attend.
The problem becomes when you start deliberating.
Right.
So passively observing.
So passively observing with Mark. If I ask a question of Mark, that's fine, as long as me and Mike don't start deliberating.
Yeah, I'm saying well, that's what I'm going to do. And Mike, I'm going to convince you of my point of view and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel good about all of us attending that also. Okay, that's my story on that. Anything else at this point in time, Mila?
No,
Yeah, well,
I think that sounds good to me. I'm, open to any conversations anybody wants to have. Just, please get in touch. I would love to get to know what you've been doing and what your priorities are and, what's coming up.
Yeah. So Mila, that meeting that Arnie was talking about, there's basically been two organizations have thrown out two different water budget estimates. One is the USGS. They've subdivided the Glen Canyon Aquifer into deep and shallow parts. The shallow part is what sources Mill Creek. The deep part's what sources the city's wells. And for that reason, the USGS has a smaller number for safe yield for the deep aquifer because they think of the water flowing down Mill Creek as being sourced in a different place and going different places, as opposed to Mr. Stilson, who kind of lumps them all together, and he's counting. Mill Creek is like another 5,000 acre feet or more. And so if you lump those numbers into what comes out of the total Glen Canyon aquifer, then things don't look so bleak. But then the question becomes, well, how are you going to make use of that 5,000 acre feet, considering that it's already appropriated for ag use and a variety of residential uses? I'm one of the many city users of Moab Irrigation Company water here in town, for what that's worth. So anyway, to some extent, when you hear two different numbers, just be aware that we're talking to some extent about apples and oranges, okay? And the other thing Mark is involved with is the wetlands. There's lower in the valley, there's a briny layer that underlies the fresh water layer. And we want to make sure that we don't ever get that brine layer mixed up everybody wants to protect the wetlands. Okay, so that's another UGS funded study, not funded. The city's supposed to participate in the funding of that as well, but they're running the show on that one along with Mark's help. So it's not just the Glen Canyon aquifer that's of scientific interest right now, but there's the Valley Fill aquifer and particularly the lower part of it. And because Mark's worried about, what happens if they do end up effectively closing to further withdrawals at Glen Canyon aquifer, then people would be tempted to suck more water out of the valley, and we want to make sure that we don't damage the wetlands in doing so. So that's a second science question.
Yeah.
Complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Groundwater is a tricky thing, unfortunately.
Anything else for Mila at this point in time? So I'm looking at the agenda off to the side. I have a couple of things I've printed since then, but the next item is water conservation plan update, review and discussion of draft conservation policies. I got a catch-up session, and it looks like committee member Eve Talman is going to leave this discussion.
Or ask all the questions, I guess.
I got to get up for just a second and grab those other papers, but keep talking.
Okay. Well, we've talked about it in the past couple of meetings, but I know that there's a list of assigned duties that still has blanks, and I was able to get from the recorder's office, Mila, the remember when I would put sticky notes on the plan, guys, from way back when. So I have these corrections, Mila. They're not necessarily updates, but they're things that we caught after the first draft, after the 2016 update was published. And so I have all these for you, Mila, for the 2021 update. So some of the notes are really vague, but it will help when we do the new tables that have the new information, to make sure that we aren't using the wrong old information. That makes sense. And so I'll get those to you. And then I guess it's a little hard without Jeremy here, but I know that that Carly has different, she mentioned that she has other ideas for how it's going to look this time. So maybe it's a good time to go over that. I don't know what the most useful format is, but if we want to get a draft completed by August, is what I'm understanding, then to me, it seems like we need to either change the table of contents or go through the table of contents to make sure that there are personnel assigned to each item. And Cara, go ahead.
I'm sorry I missed the last couple of meetings. Spring is just spring. When you work with plants, you're kind of, sorry about that. So we did start before last year when I was chair, we did start to try to go through and actually make some revisions, and we had some language done. I don't know if that's been looked at all lately, or if that's just been thrown out. It doesn't matter to me particularly, but I still do have the document that I had been sending to Summer that has some of that, where we had notes added last July, and then sections that were generated with board input, and then some generated board discussion, and then notes from September 10th, because we had a lot of conversations last year before we got back into the all-day eddy of how much water do we have, which we never seem to be able to break out of. We did have some pretty good discussions about some of those other things, including some possible ordinances or education and outreach topics, things like that. So I don't know how much that's being used, but I still have it, and I'm sure Summer has it because I forwarded it to her. So I apologize if I'm saying something y'all already know.
No, I'm actually, so you're saying that there's a Word document that is actually edited You're muted.
Can I share my screen briefly? Is that okay
Yeah.
with people? See if I can make this work somehow. Can people see that? Wait, share.
Here it
Here
is.
it comes.
Okay,
Yep.
can you guys see that?
Yeah.
So this is what I had been working on based on our conversations we had mostly last summer. And what we did is we went through the existing document and then had started to like just decide. And there's another one that we had that talked about like which parts are just for city staff to address versus the topics that really need more board discussion. You know, so some of these things where it's, you know, this kind of a table, this isn't something the board needs to necessarily work up. This is something that could come from city staff. Whereas when you get down into, like, Jeremy was working on this why conserve water section, and we have Arnie had worked on some water conservation goals, especially in light of some things related to some of the other goals that are kind of mandated by the states. And then when we got into education and outreach and policies and ordinances, those were the things that we never really got to, but we were talking about. And then we had added some stuff in here with the planning section for drought. So I will stop sharing my screen, but I just figured I should show you guys that in the event that if it's not useful, I'm fine with it being thrown away. But we had talked about that. We had done a lot. We had tried to do some stuff last year with that.
That looks really important to use. And so the question that I have, and maybe it's a question for you, Carly, is so it seems like what Cara has, if that's shared with Mila and you, if you haven't seen it, then the question that I have, because I'm trying to envision this is a final product that's the 2021 plan or update. And so will that thing that Cara has be renamed the 2021 draft and we'll take it from there? Or is your intention to like do a whole different thing and start from scratch?
So the plan is largely, when it comes to like the documentation of the plan, like production, format, tone, all of that kind of stuff, one person will be in charge of that, and that's the sustainability director, right? So Mila knows this is a big project. She gets to hit the ground running with it. I think we can take the information already compiled from last year, because Cara's right, we did a lot of work and then just sort of tapered off for like 6 months. Some folks did some work about like regarding both some of the statutorily mandated information plus supplemental information that's important to us as a community for our water conservation, work. So I would envision Mila taking that information we've done, the information you've done, Eve, those notes that you've taken, and then sort of looking at it and deciding if she wants to do an update, a whole reformat, something completely new. And that would be mostly, it would be Mila. And then when it comes to like demand projections, water usage reporting, that's all engineering staff. That's all staff side. The water board, where we want to deploy you, is in the part of the plan where we develop new programs and policies, which is what we're doing in these next agenda items. So last month, we talked about like, I can't even remember now. Time of day ordinance was one. There was one before that, like 2 months ago, where I had like a little blurb about the policy, the reasoning behind the policy, estimated water use, and steps we needed to make that policy happen, right? So it's a little blurb that would go into the conservation plan. It doesn't have to be, endorsed word for word by this board. It's just like, yes, we like this. Mila, go make sure this goes in there and it makes sense with the rest of the plan. Because we want to capture your expertise in the development of these programs and policies. So this is further either complicated or refined by the fact that we have you here, Eve, who produced the first plan. So we might have you as a board member when you're kind of giving advice, adding your input, and Cara too, as we were crafting sort of the vision for the plan. And then I know we've talked, Eve, a little bit about maybe having you do some extra help, but we can talk about that offline. But so for the work of this board is those programs and policies, the action items that we're going to do to get to our conservation goals. So today we're talking about the water shortage contingency, adopting, like, yes, we endorse that as something to be developed. We're talking about gray water. We're talking about development of a landscape ordinance. Those are all, we're not going to develop the landscape ordinance, right? We're not going to develop the gray water ordinance, but we're just developing them as proposals in our conservation plan to let the state know in the next 5 years, this is what we want to work to do. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, and that time of day of week thing, is that part of the landscape, or is that a separate thing that's like out the gate?
That would be, I think, something separate. It's on a different schedule. The landscape ordinance seems to me is just like a huge, like, it's bigger for this plan, you know? And there are just so many ways to go about a landscape ordinance. So that might be, you know, we put the intent to develop it in the plan this year, and then next year we actually develop the ordinance and go through a big public process, have different experts come. We have expertise here on the board. So out of the intent in the plan, we get that ordinance eventually. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and it seems like the water conservation plan talks about the sustainability plan, and and also the it looks like we lost Mila.
We lost Mila. I know she's having computer program problems. We had a brand new laptop for her and it keeps crashing. So it's important because I definitely want her to hear it.
Okay, it's probably not too helpful of a conversation to have if she can't hear it. Yeah. But basically, you know, it's sort of like this closed circle. Like the water plan refers to the sustainability plan, and the sustainability plan refers to the water plan.
Yeah, and you know what? She just is down the hall, so I just told her to come in here. So that's the second time that's happened in an hour. So I'm worried it's going to happen again. We're both vaccinated and.
So one other thing I just wanted to toss out there with this, what we tried to do last year and it kind of fell apart was, and the year before, was to put a bit of a timeline on some of this stuff too, so that we could be assigned to, hey, be thinking about this one, or, you know, and that's where we came up with some assignments for people to write, but then also some sense, because I think that could be helpful for Mila to have some sense of, you know, oh, okay, I should really focus on this section of it first or whatever, so that way we're able to have some really constructive conversations. I think it's great. I think the other reason, honestly, that it kind of didn't get a lot of traction for us was Carly was wearing so many hats that it's impossible for her to ever put the time in that was needed, and there really wasn't someone else to put the time in that was needed to truly start to craft the final document. And so I'm hopeful that with Mila there, we can do that.
Someone who is just concentrated on
right
this.
Instead of being pulled to 75 other meetings at the drop of a hat every other day.
Yeah. I don't know if I don't know about where else that document exists, Cara, besides with you, because I was trying to get it, and I don't know. I got the hard copy though, which is what I
think it was attached to minutes a couple times, and I think Summer has it. So and probably the most correct way for it to get out to people is to check with Summer first, because the idea was trying to make sure we had a document that was sort of a more official record as opposed to the one that I have on my computer. But if Summer doesn't have it or can't find it, I've still got it, and I will happily share it.
Yeah, save that. Okay. All right, so
I can relay all that back to Mila. Maybe she'll come back in, so we can move on.
Okay.
And just really quick, just so everyone knows, if I leave, it's because I have a pre-scheduled appointment at 4 that's going to be a phone call. So if I leave, it's not that I hate y'all; it's just that I gotta go.
I'm hoping to be out of here by 4.
Thank you.
Okay, Mila is here. I was going to suggest she could call in also, and we could do a phone person. But if she's there now, that's great.
I don't know what's happening. My computer's crashed 3 times in the last day and a half.
So, did we just have a review and discussion of draft conservation policies, or are we going to do that now, you guys? I do know I was tasked at the last meeting to write some verbiage or a section on the gray water ordinance, and I completed that. I shared it with Jeremy, and I'm ready to show that at this point in time, if that's what you would like to see.
I think personally, I would really like to make sure we chat with Mila, because I mean, we only have 40 minutes left to this meeting and a whole lot of topics on here. So I don't know what would be most useful to Mila. I'm not opposed to going over the gray water language, but I just want to make sure while she's got us that she can tell us what she wants.
Yeah, can you send it to us, Arnie?
I sure can. I was thinking that it might get out there sooner, but that's fine. It's only 4 paragraphs long, you guys. It's not a big deal. But if
Well,
you want,
I just have this tiny thing that was in the packet. It was like a few sentences.
yeah, that's actually not anything that I put together.
Okay.
I was tasked to write the language for what would be in the water conservation plan for a gray water ordinance. And I did
sorry.
it. Go ahead,
And
Cara.
I guess the main reason I just was thinking it made sense to chat with Mila about this first is because we now have Mila and we aren't having to rely or hope that Carly gets time to write any of this. I'd really like to get a sense of how she's envisioning. Does she want us to actually write sections and send them to her, or does she want us to have discussions about topics and then she takes notes during that discussion and she writes it? Because that's 2 very different, because in order to have a document that actually holds together so for the reader later, and they're not bouncing around with different writing styles and preferences of whether they use the Oxford comma or not. I'd like to get a sense of that from Mila before we jump on.
Yeah, thanks, Cara. I think I would definitely prefer, the discussion and note-taking style, at least for now. I think it is a lot easier if I can just kind of go through it and actually do it as one document myself with as far as the writing goes. I would really love to be able to take advantage of, everybody's expertise as much as possible, though. So, I think that, if there's a case where, it just makes more sense for, somebody who has the right language to do that, then that's fine. But I think maybe it would be better to do that as a kind of case by case. And in the meantime, just go through the sections that we need to discuss and then get the facts and figures settled. And I can do the actual writing.
So can we rely on you in future meetings to alert us ahead of time what sections we're going to talk about, and then maybe have a bit of a list of questions you might want to be having us deal with and things like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah,
But if I'm understanding it, Arnie has already done this work. So I guess I'd like to see what Arnie's written, and that would potentially give you a leg up.
We could be done with the section.
Hey, Arnie, may I ask a question? Forgive me. I thought Eve asked a great question a while back. Same thing I'm wondering about. It seems we've got 4 players in here. I mean, we've got Mila now and Carly, city employees. We've got Cara, who's a water conservation guru. We've got Eve, who was a principal in getting the first one published. I'd like to know, because I'm a contributor of material as well, just like Arnie's about to be, who's going to play, I'll call it publisher, all right? Who's going to take, some person's going to take the responsibility for making sure this thing gets out the door and satisfies the state's requirements. And that will be the person who's going to champion and solicit all the other help that they're going to need from contributors to make it
Pointing at her
happen.
at the screen.
So
I'm
who's
pointing
that?
at her on the screen.
Yeah, it's Mila. Mila's the one.
You're the one. All right. So is that, everybody's agreed on that one now? Okay. Is that right?
We need that. We need to not have all of us writing stuff and then trying to marry it together.
Okay. I just wondered who it was. She just showed up Monday. All right. So All right, well, that's wonderful. If you're willing to take the ball by the
I
horn.
kind of
bull
think
by the
she's been
horn.
voluntold. I think she's been a little bit voluntold on that one.
Okay, so Mila, hopefully you know that I've already contributed some material to that document as well. So just so you'll know.
Great.
Thank you.
So where do you guys want to go from here? The next thing on our agenda is the review of the draft conservation policies, and then water shortage contingency plan, the gray water ordinance, and the landscape ordinance. Do you want to talk about the water shortage contingency plan and then the gray water ordinance? And we'll share my work at that point in time with the gray water ordinance later. Is that okay? So the water shortage contingency plan, I was under the impression, Carly, that it basically was a statement that we're going to develop a water shortage contingency plan by the city in case of an emergency or a long-term drought situation, which we would then, at that point in time, that would give the city the opportunity to make ordinances, so on and so forth for that. There's two things going on there. I'm sorry, I got two things messed up there. One was we, as a group, recommended that you develop an ordinance that allowed the city to write ordinances for water. And we approved, I think the city council's already approved that too, haven't they?
Yes, they did. So,
Okay,
this
so that's done. Yeah.
But we want to include it in the plan so that the state knows that's what we're doing.
Right, that sounds great. So we're done with that one. The other one is now this water shortage contingency plan, which if I'm not incorrect, I believe Levi and the city under emergency can do just about anything they want with their water and tell people what to do. But the idea here is that we have something in writing that gives us an idea of where we're going to go. Is that what you're thinking?
So what it would do, we have an emergency plan. The emergency plan is basically what we do in the most extreme circumstances to protect fire flow, essentially, or basic culinary needs. So Levi has that emergency, we have that, it needs to be updated, it's a different discussion. The water shortage contingency plan that would be authorized by passage of this ordinance for us to develop is a plan with several steps or stages. So there's an advisory stage, there's a mandatory stage, there's a restricted stage, and then there's an emergency stage. So it would different thresholds of water levels or events. Say we have a water quality event in one of our pumps or something, and we lose some amount of water, or some amount of water is at risk. Or we're in a long-term drought and we're kind of seeing that over, the next year we're in such an extreme drought, we know we're going to have a shortage the next year, something like that. We would go into different stages of action. So that would be about what the city would be doing. It's our own internal plan, along with what we need the community to do in those situations. Does that make sense?
So what I've seen in the documentation put out by Water Resources and stuff like that is that, okay, we got to cut our water by 25%. This is how we're going to do it. And it could be, we're not going to water public lawns. The city's going to do that. There's things like that. And as the stages get more difficult or the water gets less, the limitations on what you're going to do gets greater. And that is something that, although the water board here can give you some ideas on, but the bottom line is that Levi's got to know how much water we got and how much he needs to keep the fire flows in there. And you folks as a city will have to determine how to make that happen. But go ahead, Cara.
I just wanted to suggest it isn't or make sure I'm understanding correctly. It's not like we're writing a water shortage contingency plan here. We're just writing the intention of it. So I don't know that we need to get into a whole lot of detail about it, because I think we could eddy out there for months as well. Yeah. So I just want to clarify that it's not that we're writing these things. We're just saying, okay, the intention is this, and maybe having some, I would assume that we would want a little bit of what that intention might be of that water contingency plan, but we wouldn't necessarily be getting into all those levels of detail, correct?
Right.
That's correct. That's what I understood.
This is the blurb for the conservation plan. We're saying, state, we're doing this in the next 5 years.
Because that's a whole lot easier and faster.
Yes.
That's the kind of thing you can suggest, up to and including restrictions on so and so and call it good. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got what you sent us, Carly. And are you hoping that the board at this point in time would suggest that the city move forward with this kind of item?
I think
Yeah.
Steve had a question too.
I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Yeah.
So as part of this plan, would that include some kind of a monitoring program to look at the status of the underground aquifers? Would that be an early warning system?
I mean,
Can I answer that, Carly? From my point of view, Steve, Division of Water Rights owns the water. And when they tell us we got to cut our water back because there's no more water or we're in our groundwater management plan, they hold the key.
So what I'm talking about is, looks like the snowpack's going to be low this year.
Yeah.
And I've read several reports that says there's like a 2-year lag affecting the aquifers. So would we want to have a monitoring program to kind of check to see if it's coming a shortage in 2 years?
Yeah.
Or reduction in the aquifers to plan ahead for that?
yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Steve. It's hard for us because we have a delay, right? We've got like a wicked problem in front of us, which is we're not going to see like choice and consequence immediately. There's going to be
Right.
such a lag. So that's exactly what the shortage contingency plan is meant to address. It's sort of like every spring we evaluate snowpack for both like the immediate irrigation system as well as like plans into the future and what kind of levels we need to meet for the next winter in order to not worry about 2 years or 3 years out, right? So it's that kind of long-term view of the water. The other issue is that we don't necessarily want to get to an emergency before we act. So it may be, of course, like if there's an issue with the aquifer, we kick into action, right? But we also want to kick into action to avoid the crisis to begin with. So Salt Lake City, for example, they have a water shortage contingency plan with many stages, and they're not in a drought quite yet. They're predicting one, and they're in their advisory stage right now, which is more educational and informative to the public in hopes they change their behavior so they avoid a bigger catastrophe, when it gets to August. So it's not just about the state coming in and like cutting off and giving everyone a haircut. It's about us managing the resources that we're drawing from springs, from the aquifer, to hopefully mitigate the state even needing to do that, right?
So would the action step be a low snowpack, take action now, take more action next summer type thing?
Type thing, yeah. Looking at the snowpack, looking at rainfall, looking at like maybe soil conditions, some very, a whole suite of issues to understand the water situation for the upcoming, obviously irrigation season, but we might also get to a situation where we lose like a water tank for some reason, starts leaking in the winter.
Right.
And we'd have to go into a shortage contingency scenario, so.
And that did in fact happen one year. This was maybe 20 something years ago, and it actually happened in May. And it was pretty awful because it meant that all of a sudden you couldn't water all kinds of things. It was 20 or more years ago. It was pretty bizarre. So it does happen.
I personally don't have any problem with the way this was written. I was a little concerned about the city manager developing it. I realized, though, I really think Levi should be the one that should kind of be in charge of that because he's got all the numbers, but then Levi isn't necessarily the boss of the sustainability director and some of the other people. And so the city manager somewhat needs to coordinate that. Having the city manager develop the water management plan with the use of his employees sounds great. Whether or not the city manager is actually the one that institutes when we move into an action is another story. And that would be part of the plan, how we would actually do it. We don't need to ferret that out at this point in time. Cara's quite right. We don't need to get into the details of this. I don't have a problem with this. Steve, as far as the discussion on whether or not it's 2 years down the road, we start losing water because of a low water year, we don't have the science available to know that. We don't have anybody out there that actually knows that stuff. We're way short on monitoring. Mark Stilson's trying to do a good job of getting more monitoring in our area, but we don't have the science at this point in time to back up anything to say we're going to be short on water in 2 years because we got low snow this year. It's just not out there.
There was a report written in 2007 that indicated the 2-year lag at that time. I don't know if it's been updated, but
I've read that report. We still have plenty of groundwater to draw on. The springs may develop, the springs flow may go down, but we still have plenty of groundwater to take out of the ground and plenty of water rights to do it. And we have the pumps and everything else. So because the springs don't flow doesn't put us in a water shortage for the city.
Hey, Ernie, thanks for the confidence. City staff, we've all been working together to have this. So yeah, thank you.
So Arnie, I'm going to agree with Steve in the sense that you guys remember a year or two ago, I did a extensive study of well depth of waters with a bunch of USGS monitoring wells. And there is in fact a repetitive year or 2 year delay in water levels from snowpack and so forth. So it does exist. So I wouldn't be quite so blithe, as it were, about ignoring the whole thing when we have a low snow year. I would pay some attention, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, at this point in time, water rights does not say we're mining the water. So I don't believe we have the expertise in our group to say we're mining the aquifer.
We'll see about that, Arnie.
Well, and here's the thing. I'd really like to not have us continuously go back to how much water do we have, because I feel like we really eddy out there a lot and we never get through our topics on our meetings. That's just me.
I personally like the way this is written at this point in time. Does anybody have any other comments on the ordinance on the conservation action to develop a water shortage contingency plan? Does anybody have any problem with that ordinance as it's written?
I don't have a problem, but I did want to point out this. I think that, this may not be the language exactly that Mila adopts. And I think we all should be expecting that, because I would hope that she'd look at it. And if she has additional questions for Levi or the rest of us to make sure that this is correct, that we aren't upset if in a few months we see something a little different from this in the plan.
Carly, do we need a motion to move forward on this?
I don't think so. No, we're good. It's just discussion.
Does anybody have any real problems with this conservation action, developing a water shortage contingency plan? Now's your time. Sounds like they're in agreement that there's something like this should move forward. Okay. The next one is the gray water ordinance. And what you have provided is, do you want me to share my screen just so I can show it what everybody's got? Or, yep. What you've written? Hang on a second. I haven't done that in a little while.
It's all right. Steve passed this along, the gray water, I think some language about commercial use. Is that right, Steve?
yes. What I was trying to think about was if this is passed, how does a business go in and make the application to the city? And there's a couple things. There's a lot of commercial businesses that wouldn't really generate any usable or very little usable gray water. If you don't have showers, basically, you don't generate very much usable gray water. So I would think that the ordinance would want to specifically say that, say an auto mechanic shop or something like that wouldn't necessarily have to have a gray water plan. And then I would think the site plan, the engineering that would be presented when you go for your building permit would have a fairly specific landscaping plan. And so I would think you could relate the amount of water needed for that with the amount of gray water that the business should acquire.
Carly left the room. Am I still muted?
You're there.
I'm there. So there was a discussion and the city was moving towards requiring either stormwater retention or gray water sufficient to irrigate any landscaping? And I don't know if that's where they're still going with this. But this one was just straight about gray water.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I had this hunch that it was for any new hotels would have the first floor. That was maybe a conversation I had with Carly or something a while ago, but not just, like a oil change business, but rather specifically like nightly rentals that have of a certain size, that have either laundry or showers or something, and then only on the first floor for ease.
That's kind of what I was saying. I haven't seen any language at all on this. And so I was thinking this would be a couple of points that we probably ought to think about when we make that language.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in on this too, Steve. I think you got a good point, and that I can see certain businesses where the volume of gray water that would be produced during the year, compare that to the amount of costs that have to go into implementing it and so forth. And you could see that, if there's a criteria that says you got to spend more than so many bucks to get so many gallons a year, you would say, it makes water 100 times the price of what it will come through your pipe, that you could exclude those kinds of businesses from and not make them jump through all those hoops for a relatively insignificant amount of water. And then there's other types of businesses where that's not the case at all. But I think it would be a great figure of merit for businesses to calculate how much gray water they anticipate saving, because otherwise we're liable to find ourselves off in left field someplace, making builders and so forth go to a lot of expenses for a relatively negligible amount of water.
If you guys don't mind, go ahead, Cara. Go ahead, Cara.
I just wanted to toss out something about gray water and what I've noticed over years of being a landscape contractor and then running screaming away from being a landscape contractor. And that is that, especially in commercial situations, for one, the plans are usually poorly done and are not good in terms of nuance of water zoning and things like that. And the other I'd like to say is almost more importantly, not quite, but almost, it's kind of equal importance, is there are very few businesses in this town that actually understand how to maintain a landscape properly. And that's just a basic observation I've had over 20 plus years of living here, and a portion of that time installing landscapes and watching them look horrible after I leave and not want to tell anyone that we had anything to do with it. And then there are others like City Hall that I think are done fairly well and and the library I think are great. I would like to caution us to be very careful how we deal with anything related to things that could have unintended consequences as far as landscaping goes, because I think we could end up with some completely disgusting weed messes if it's not done right. And so that's just something, it's just a pet peeve of mine. I'll shut up now.
So Cara and everyone out there, Cara's quite right that landscaping and gray water go hand in hand. There's no doubt about it. It takes both of them to make it work. My comment on this gray water suggested language at this point in time was that it only included commercial use, and I was a proponent, as you know, of both residential and commercial. You guys, I actually think I've somewhat nailed what everybody's trying to say here in my gray water reuse opportunities for water conservation in the city of Moab. I'd like to share that with you guys at this point in time, and we can have at least a discussion on it. If not, we can wait till next time. It's only 4 paragraphs long. It's 342. The only thing we have to talk about after this is a landscaping ordinance. Do we even have, and I don't have any material on that.
That's going to be see, I think the point, Arnie, isn't that we have already written language. It's that we have a discussion, and I don't see us finishing a discussion on the landscaping ordinance in 15 minutes, which is fine. So I think we should just dive into gray water.
But to clarify, Arnie, you're going to send us this, right?
Well, I can send it to you. I can share. I was supposed to bring it to this meeting. I did that.
Well,
Um,
and part of it, Arnie, I don't do well with trying to help give comment on something I'm just now seeing on the screen. I'm totally happy to look at it though. That's fine.
if we want
But
to
I'm
save
probably
it,
going to.
if we want to save the gray water ordinance at this point in time, any discussion on it, further discussion on it until the next meeting, that's fine with me. And if you want to have a 15-minute preliminary discussion on landscaping ordinance, that would be fine with me also. What does the group want to do?
I prefer to read stuff and think it over for a while before I discuss it. So I'd be good with doing it to the next meeting.
The latter suggestion I just made works for the board members that are here.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then I guess you folks can, I don't have any material on the landscape ordinance, so let's just go ahead and have a discussion. Who would like to start?
I think Mila should.
I have a lot of material that I've gotten together. Sorry, I didn't know that. I don't know the format yet of these things, but I do have a lot of information on landscape ordinances if you want to talk about it now. I'm also happy to put something together in writing that you can look at next meeting. So
I think the thing I'm most interested in is what are people thinking we want to be putting into this water conservation plan in regards to a landscape ordinance? Because I don't know that we need, I mean, we aren't going to draft the landscape ordinance at this point. But if we're putting in something about that we're going to discuss, you know, that the city's going to develop a series of landscape ordinances that links to irrigation and gray water, I think it could be useful to, you know, do we want to go so far as to actually have recommended plant lists or not? That just so y'all know, that created serious problems about 25 years ago when I was on planning commission, or 20 years ago when I was on planning commission, and it raised quite the ruckus in town. I don't know that it would raise the ruckus that it did then now, but you know, like, do we want to get into those kind of specifics, or do we want to be looking at more general guidelines and talking more about irrigation and maybe going with something similar to the local scapes concept that's been developed by the Jordan Valley Water Conservation District? I think that there, you know, I think personally that there's a whole lot more to be gained by helping residents and also even businesses who might be trying to do landscaping to get them tools that can help them do better design. Rather than creating something that makes them feel that they have to hire a landscape architect, which can cost a small fortune, and you can end up with a garbage plan. So I think that's the kind of thing I feel like might be a good general conversation to have right now, as opposed to getting into extreme nitty gritty. But that's just.
So I'm gonna just try to direct the situation here at this point in time. The landscaping ordinance would be for new development. Is that correct?
Well, that's what I want to know, Arnie. I mean, I personally think it should be for all kinds of things. I think that, you know, because if it's an ordinance that says you must do it this way, it probably has to be for only new development. But if it's like, wait a minute, we want to give people tools and information to be able to make their current landscape better and more water efficient, that's a totally different thing.
So let me ask you guys, if I may, there was an article in the Tribune, I want to say maybe a week ago, about Las Vegas and how they were adopting an aggressive water conservation plan to make them look presumably more like Phoenix, for example, where I'm about to head this weekend for what that's worth. It was a more aggressive plan, so much so that people in Salt Lake, for example, aren't ready to go there yet. They're still used to having more water around. So are you guys thinking of something more along the lines of a Phoenix, writing this into your plan here? Or are you going to talk about the way it's been done for the last 100 years in Salt Lake?
So when you say Phoenix, do you mean like xeriscape as far as like rocks and gravel? I mean, I guess that's the big thing. And I'm sorry I keep jumping in here. As you can tell, I have some fairly strong thoughts about this and a whole lot of training and experience with it. But I think we need a plan that makes, or we need to be encouraging something that makes Moab look like Moab. Not that makes Moab look like Las Vegas or Phoenix, because we are neither of those places. There was a program that was done in California in the 70s by a mentor of mine named Ann Riley, who is also who I learned stream bioengineering from. And she was working for the Department of Water Resources in California during the drought of the 70s. And what she did when she was, probably 20 something years old and tasked with help people save water, make them, you know, make them excited about installing low flow toilets and low flow water shower heads. She looked at them and said, that's crazy. We need to talk to them about landscapes because that's where all the water is used. And so she created a program where they tore out lawn all over parts of Northern California and replaced them with native plant landscapes, and they cut water significantly. And if you go to those neighborhoods today, those neighborhoods have no lawn and it looks like California. So to me, I would rather see something like that than something that's throwing around terms like xeriscape that everybody says is xeroscape and ends up with, you know, gravel and a few cactus, which like most people won't do that. And that's why I suggested this localscapes concept, which is what Jordan Valley Water has been doing over the years. So I'm sorry, you can ban me from these discussions because I definitely have some strong opinions about them.
Is Eve or Mike next?
Yeah, well, come to think of it, that the Vegas thing, their big thing was no green lawns that are not walked upon. In other words, if you had grass out there for functional purposes, I don't understand that, because who the hell is going to walk on a green lawn anyway? But that was their big thing. It wasn't necessarily xeriscaping, forgive me, Kara, but it was just no decorative lawns at all. That's where they were headed.
Kyle's trying to say something, or is that? Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Eve, talk. You've been waiting patiently.
Well, I'm just, I think that Kara's kind of our resident expert on these things. And what I'm hoping from either from Kara or from Mila is if we can be pointed toward some outstanding landscape ordinances, like it sounds like South Jordan has one, or if you know of other examples, so that we can sort of see the winning example that we would want to sort of emulate. And not that we're going to actually write it, but that we can point the city in that direction of like localscape, like Kara says. That's the first time I've heard that term, but that concept, just to save us. I mean, you know, I am a librarian, so I can go look all this up, but if you already know of things, then I appreciate being pointed toward those things.
Kyle, did you want to chime in here at this point in time?
I did on that article, I think in the Salt Lake Tribune, someplace it was mentioned that 82% of all water is used for agriculture, and most of it in Utah, and most of it being used for hay, which is exported from Utah.
I've heard that before, you take it just the groundwater. I thought it was like 65% of all groundwater is actually used for irrigating crops too. So it doesn't surprise me that 85% of all the water in Utah is used to irrigate.
And that product goes outside of Utah.
Right.
So it's commercial.
Just to follow up on Eve's comment about looking at other plans, do you know if San Juan and Grand County have completed a really good landscaping plans at all? Can we look at those, or are they the same place we are?
No. Yeah, and I just wanted to say, I have a lot of this already written down. Park City has a really great landscaping ordinance that I think would be a good example, both in their water conservation and then also for actual design, residential design. I've talked to our planning department already about a lot of this stuff. They're very supportive of really strict restrictions. The only thing to note is that when we do talk about a lot of these ideas, they don't currently review any of that for residential projects. So it would be a new requirement, which is more staff time for them, and also something that, can be a little bit tricky for the public who's used to not having those kinds of requirements. So I think simplicity is a really good thing to keep in mind. But there are also, and to your point, Mike, I think it's interesting. So USU Extension has a turf grass specialist or turf grass department. And so if we wanted to, I was going to talk to somebody tomorrow. So if you do have specific questions about that, let me know. I'm happy to share the information I get from her. But one of their main points is that if it's not, if the only traffic that an area of grass sees is from a lawnmower, it shouldn't be grass. And that was a good, a good way to figure out what you should actually have there. The turf grass is really great for like soccer fields and, places, parks and things like that. But, if you're not actually because it can be trampled. So that's the whole reason is that it can be trampled and it is okay with that. But they have a lot of really good scientific resources for us, just in developing some of these general suggestions. So I'm happy to organize the stuff I have a little better and send it around either before the next meeting or at the next meeting.
I was under the impression that San Juan County did have a landscaping ordinance for new development in the San Juan County end of Spanish Valley.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was put together. I would call it mediocre at best, personally. And then the other thing that I guess I just would love to see, I'm really excited to see what you've got, Mila, but also I feel like it's great to have an ordinance. It's great to have stuff in this water conservation plan. But I also feel like this is a topic that needs to be in our education and outreach part as well, because I think an ordinance will only get us so far. What will get us far is getting people excited about the idea of converting and saving water, which would save them money, even though the initial change from a lawn to other plants can be quite expensive, but there's ways to phase it, things like that. So I personally would like to see this conversation be about both whatever ordinance the city might put on, but also what kind of outreach and education and how we could partner with various entities in town and landscapers and things like that.
Yeah, I think you have an email in your inbox about that planting guide that I would like to be putting together. We're really hoping to be able to do that. I know the planning department sounds like they've gotten a lot of questions from people who are actually really interested in knowing more about which species and how to do it, because it does sound like nobody really knows how. And so it does seem like there's a will, but there's not a lot of information, and I think they don't know who to ask either.
And the other problem is that there's a dearth of competent, landscape contractors in this town who are available. There's a very small number of them, and there's some that specialize in what I kind of call the mow and blow concept of just get it done and get out of there. And then there's some that specialize in other things. And I think it's something we've been trying to fill that niche at the nursery a little bit with our website and different information for people. And then also just having really active conversations with them about how to do it. And that's the kind of thing I'm also thinking, an ordinance is only going to get you this far. If what we really want to see is a change of residential landscapes in Moab, in addition to some, better landscapes at commercial businesses, I think we really need to be thinking about how do we engage the community and those who are interested in some how-tos, some different, workshops, seminars, things like that can help them with the how and the plant ID and the wait, where do you get these things? And hang on, why don't I water every day? And things like that, so I think that there's a lot of that information out there. It's just not compiled. And the nursery's been trying to do that for a few years, but we're, 4 people running on a shoestring. So we can only do so much. And I think the city and county could do a whole lot more.
I was personally hoping that somehow the city and the county would enlist USU, the new extension agent, to kind of lead that up for us in terms of having those meetings and so on and so forth, developing the concept here, work with them, but they're also paid to do this work too. And it is a task on their list of things to do. So.
And the other thing, Ernie, is our plant palette is really different from what most people expect. The plants that do well here are not, someone with training from Salt Lake or Phoenix or St. George, honestly, is clueless about what really works here. They're going to throw in things that aren't cold hardy enough, or they're going to go to the USDA website and go, oh yeah, we're zone 7. No, we're not. I know USDA thinks we are, but we're not.
I
and
get
so,
it. There'll
yeah.
be some training associated with this and some back and forth with the USU people, but I still think as a resource, they
I
could
didn't
be.
say it wasn't a good resource, Arnie.
Yeah,
What I'm
it'd
saying
be-
though is there's limitations to that resource because that what I've experienced over the years is Moab is a little bit. I tend to shy away from saying that, you know, things are different here because in a lot of cases we all think they're different here and they're not. But, you know, every gateway community has the problems we have. But when it comes to plants, we are really strange. Our weeds are more of a pain in the butt and our native plants are a lot less interesting than some of the other areas that are doing this stuff.
Okay. We've got 1.5 minutes left here today. Is there anybody else like to discuss at this point in time any more landscaping thoughts? Are we going to let our sustainability director at this point in time run with the ideas that she's heard? And we'll have this discussion, I'm sure, again. And have you got some good ideas from us, Milo, on what we're thinking here at this point in time?
Yeah, I think I can put something together for the next meeting for sure. That's coherent.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments at this point in time?
I would love to get Cara and Mila, for that matter, out here at my little over 1 acre thing up here on Rose Tree. I'm sitting here looking out the window, chasing the deer off my rose bushes as we speak. And, you know, I got some kind of half weeds, half grass extended lawn out there, which would be, and under your future landscaping plan, may be totally out of character. And love to see what you guys would suggest I should do with this stupid lawn, okay? Because I really have no idea.
I've got about 100 people that want me to do that, Mike. I don't think I can quite fit that in next week.
Kyle, did you want to say something?
Yes, a little plug for Cara. And I've got a little maple tree here, about 4 foot high, that I bought from her about 20 years ago or 15. And it's 40 feet high now. So I don't want to leave trees out of this whole plant thing either.
Yes, I agree completely. And that I think links to the irrigation component too.
Thank you.
It's 4 o'clock.
Thank you, everybody.
Would you like to adjourn this meeting, people?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
I think we're all in favor. If I guess we'll see each other next month. And did we decide we're meeting indoors or outdoors? We're meeting indoors next month, or we're going to talk to Jeremy.
Jeremy's going to make that call.
Jerry's going to make that call, and you're going to let him know what our feelings are. Carly, you're going to do that?
Yep, he's gonna watch this video.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.